Because resources are unevenly distributed, trade in commodities has become an enormously important part of the global economy. In this lecture, we will examine key concepts and spatial patterns in the changing geographies of industry and service, to include Fordism and flexible production. These topics are important to geography to see and understand how and why the spatial patterns of industry and services have changed in a global setting. F. W. Taylor, a mechanical engineer, first devised the principles of scientific management. Scientific management, now called Taylorism, promoted the division of labor into the most elemental tasks in order to maximize efficiencies and minimize time it would take to complete each task. He realized this by studying the tasks performed by workers, timing the workers, and if necessary, altering their movements in order to minimize wasted time. Henry Ford, based on Taylorism, was the first person to devise a moving assembly line for mass production, whereas the product could be sold at affordable prices for the average person, in which his case were automobiles. Prior to that, automobiles were considered luxury items that only the wealthy could afford. With his system, which was called Fordism, he was able to then produce a single car at half the time. Ford revolutionized manufacturing. However, Fordism was not without consequences. One, Fordism created a de-skilling of labor. The specialized craft person was no longer required. Two, Fordism created a rigid social hierarchy between workers and managers. And three, Fordism contributed to the rise of multinational corporations. Fordism spilled over into other industries as well. The assembly line was very efficient and productive, but there were weaknesses. One, the assembly line had to constantly be moving to be the most effective. Two, there had to be a mass market for the product, which assumes unlimited growth in both production and sales. And three, assembly line work is extremely boring, which creates high rates of turnover. A few of the solutions to these weaknesses were collective agreements, which when signed by the workers established high wages and long-term work, and vertical integration, which occurs when a company controls two or more stages in the production of distribution of a commodity. This then lessens the company's vulnerabilities. For example, by the 1940s, Ford owned mines, quarries, and forests in different states and built factories at the River Road plant, as shown in the photo, to manufacture iron, steel, tires, glass, and lumber used in the production of cars. These massive coal and ore bins were a testament to the vast scale of Ford's operations made possible by vertical integration. Unfortunately, Fordism has been in steady decline since the 1970s. There are two reasons for the crisis of Fordism. One, there was an energy crisis in the 1970s that increased manufacturing and transportation costs. And two, improvements in computers and electronics began to transform industrial practices. These two factors showed that Fordism is a highly inflexible system of production and does not easily or rapidly adjust to changing economic or market conditions. As Fordist systems of production developed, they became closely associated with producer-driven commodity chains. A commodity chain can be thought of as a network that connects the different steps in the production of a good, from information and resource gathering to the manufacture, distribution, and marketing of it. Every manufacturing operation makes use of one or more commodity chains, and such networks are increasingly globalized. Here we present a commodity chain for fur garments, which is strongly anchored to the northern hemisphere. Globalization can affect any part of a commodity chain. Historical centers for the dressing and dyeing of fur included Paris, London, Leipzig, Germany, Montreal, and St. Louis. This map shows that the manufacturing of fur garments has globalized and shifted east. Unlike the large U.S. markets, Japan had a much smaller market and therefore developed a manufacturing and production system called flexible production. Flexible production began specifically within the Japanese company of Toyota. In the system, Toyota used information technology such as computer networking, high-tech sensors, and automation technology to make the production of goods more responsive to market conditions and therefore more efficient. In contrast to Fordism, flexible production relies on consumer-driven commodity chains, not producer-driven commodity chains, in which the consumer demand shapes the amount and kind of product produced. Table 10.2 highlights some of the differences between Fordism and flexible production. In flexible production, two strategies are crucial to its success. One is just-in-time delivery, which is the practice of having smaller quantities of supplies on hand on an as-is basis to fill orders on demand without the need for large warehouse stores of materials. And second is outsourcing, which is subcontracting out a business activity that was previously performed in-house. The photo shows employees working at Hewlett-Packard's Business Process Outsourcing Center in Bangalore, India. Reasons for outsourcing vary depending on the type of business, but generally companies outsource in order to streamline their business operations. This includes achieving reductions in the cost of utilities, labor, rent, or personal and resource management. Please pause the video and answer the following. Compare and contrast Fordism and flexible production. Include where these two methods of production were introduced, what industry, and why these systems were developed. In your own words, using the text as a guide, be thorough and specific in your answer.